You can't be serious, she said, her voice dripping with a condescension that was both familiar and infuriating. You're actually going to let him have it? My own voice, when it finally came, was surprisingly steady. Yes, Eleanor. I am. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, a physical manifestation of years of unspoken resentments and carefully curated slights. It was the morning of my brother, David's, wedding. The house, usually a sanctuary of quiet order, was in a state of controlled chaos. Wedding guests milled about, a blur of champagne dresses and ill-fitting suits, their forced merriment a thin veneer over the usual family drama. My mother, a whirlwind of nervous energy, was directing last-minute floral arrangements. My father, bless his oblivious heart, was schmoozing with the caterer. And Eleanor, David's soon-to-be wife, was standing in my kitchen, her eyes fixed on me with an expression I knew all too well, the glint of entitlement, the assurance of victory. My normal life, the one I'd meticulously built outside the suffocating embrace of my family, was a quiet existence. I was an architect, finding solace in clean lines and structural integrity, a stark contrast to the emotional demolition zones that characterized our family gatherings. David, my brother, was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the recipient of endless praise and, as it turned out, endless spoils. Eleanor was the latest addition to this gilded cage, a woman who seemed to have perfected the art of extracting maximum benefit with minimal effort. This wasn't a sudden eruption of conflict. This was a slow, insidious erosion. I remembered a time, years ago, when my grandmother passed. She'd left specific instructions for her antique mahogany desk, a piece I'd always adored, to be inherited by me. A sentimental gesture, she'd called it, a way to remember her. The day after the funeral, Eleanor, who I'd barely known then, had cornered me. David really loved that desk, she'd purred, her hand resting possessively on my arm. It would mean so much to him to have it in their new home. I'd stammered something about Grandma's wishes, but Eleanor just smiled, a shark smile. Oh, you know how David is. He gets so sentimental. He'll really cherish it. The desk, of course, ended up in their living room, a gleaming monument to Eleanor's persuasive, or rather, manipulative, power. Then there was the matter of the cottage. Our parents owned a small, rustic cottage upstate, a place where we'd spent summers as children. It was in disrepair, needing a new roof and a lot of love. David and Eleanor, ever the ambitious couple, had offered to take it on, to restore its former glory. What that really meant was they'd convinced our parents to give them a substantial sum from their savings, ostensibly for renovations, but which was largely absorbed into their own lifestyle. They'd renovated it by painting the walls a garish shade of teal and installing a granite countertop in the kitchen, the kind you'd find in a hotel suite, completely out of place in the otherwise charming, if slightly dilapidated, structure. I'd visited once, politely pointing out a structural issue with the fireplace. Eleanor had waved me away. Oh, that's just character, she'd said, a dismissive flick of her wrist. We hired professionals. They know best. The professionals had clearly been instructed to cater to Eleanor's taste, not to preserve the cottage's integrity. And now, this. The kitchen chair. It wasn't just any chair. It was a simple, sturdy, wooden chair, painted a cheerful, if slightly chipped, robin's egg blue. It had been my grandmother's. She used to sit in it when she'd read me stories, her lap a warm haven. After she passed, it had found a home in our kitchen, a constant, comforting presence. It was the kind of item that held memories, that whispered of shared moments, that was, in its own quiet way, irreplaceable. It's just a chair, Eleanor, David said, his voice laced with that familiar, appeasing tone he reserved for family squabbles. He was leaning against the doorframe, looking exasperated, clearly wanting this minor hiccup to be over so he could enjoy his big day. It's not just a chair, David, Eleanor corrected, her eyes still locked on me, a predatory gleam in them. It's a piece of your grandmother's history. And it would look perfect in our entryway. Such a charming, rustic touch. She turned to David, her voice softening, turning on the full force of her charm. Wouldn't it, darling? Imagine it, right by the door, a welcoming sight for our guests. David, predictably, sighed. "Mom, Dad, can we just..." But my mother, sensing a potential storm, intervened. "Eleanor, darling, it's a lovely thought, but that chair has always been in the kitchen. It has sentimental value for all of us." "Exactly," Eleanor chirped, her smile widening. "And I'm sure my new sister-in-law understands that. She's so practical. She'll see that it's better used where it can be appreciated by more people. Like in our home." She looked back at me, her expression a perfect blend of faux concern and smug triumph. "I mean, it's just a chair, isn't it? You have so many other beautiful things. Surely you won't miss this one." The air crackled. The cheerful chatter from the other rooms seemed to fade into a distant hum. The robin's egg blue of the chair, usually a source of comfort, now felt stark, exposed. It was a symbol. A symbol of everything Eleanor had taken, of everything David had allowed her to take, of my own silent complicity in my own diminishment. The chair, in that moment, wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was the last straw. I walked slowly towards the chair. My footsteps were deliberately measured, each one echoing the weight of years of suppressed frustration. Eleanor watched me, her head tilted, a flicker of anticipation in her eyes. She expected me to protest, to plead, perhaps even to cry. She thrived on drama, on eliciting emotional responses that she could then dissect and dismiss. I reached the chair and placed my hands on its smooth, worn arms. It felt solid, grounded. I ran my thumb over a small chip in the paint, a mark from a long-ago spill, a tiny scar that spoke of resilience. I looked at Eleanor, and for the first time, I didn't see the manipulative woman who had systematically chipped away at my family's history. I saw a victim of her own insatiable need. But more importantly, I saw my opportunity. "You're right, Eleanor," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. "It's just a chair. And it would look perfect, wherever it's meant to be." Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. "So, you're agreeing?" "In a way," I replied, my gaze shifting to David, then back to Eleanor. "But not for your entryway. And not for your home." I paused, letting the silence stretch. The wedding preparations, the forced smiles, the superficial pleasantries, it all felt like a stage set for something far more substantial. My grandmother loved this chair. She loved how it felt to sit in it, to read, to just be. I traced the grain of the wood again. "And that's exactly what I intend to do with it." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about honoring her memory, Eleanor," I said, my tone still gentle, but with an underlying steel that I knew she wouldn't miss. "And I'm talking about the fact that this chair, like many things, has a legal designation." The smug certainty on Eleanor's face began to crack. David shifted uncomfortably. "What legal designation?" "It's just a chair. It's part of Grandma's estate, David," I clarified. "And specifically, it was willed to me. Along with a few other items. I have the documentation." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. It wasn't a dramatic reveal, no bursting envelope or sudden flourish. It was a simple, official document. "This specifies that the chair, the small oil painting of the lake, and a collection of her gardening books were to be mine." My grandmother was meticulous. She understood that sentimentality needed a legal backup, especially in this family. Eleanor's eyes widened, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. "That's ridiculous. That's just a formality." "It's the law, Eleanor," I said, my voice unwavering. "And in this case, it's also a matter of my grandmother's expressed wishes. Wishes that were clearly overlooked in other instances." I let that hang in the air, a subtle nod to the desk, to the cottage. David looked from me to Eleanor, his usual placidity replaced by a dawning realization. "You mean, she actually willed it to you?" "Explicitly," I confirmed, holding up the document. "It's all here. And the terms were quite clear. If these items were not passed on as stipulated, the remainder of her collection of antique porcelain figurines, which are quite valuable, would instead be donated to a museum. I met Eleanor's gaze. Her face had gone pale, her lips pressed into a thin, white line. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. "You can't," she whispered, her voice strained. "You wouldn't." "Wouldn't I?" I asked, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. "My grandmother's wishes are important to me. And frankly, so is the proper distribution of her estate. I've held on to this for a long time, Eleanor. I've endured a lot of misunderstandings. But this chair," I patted its seat, "this is a tangible reminder of what truly matters. And a tangible reminder of who gets to decide." The realization hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, her eyes darting between the chair, the document in my hand, and David's stunned expression. The smugness, the entitlement, the absolute certainty that she'd have her way, it all evaporated in an instant. She had been so focused on what she could take, on how she could manipulate, that she had forgotten that times, the quietest people have the sharpest defenses. The rest of the wedding day was a surreal blur. Eleanor, deprived of her prize and likely realizing the legal ramifications of her actions, was a ghost. She barely spoke, her usual effervescence replaced by a tight-lipped silence. Her mother, a woman who had always encouraged Eleanor's acquisitive tendencies, kept shooting me venomous glares, but even she seemed to grasp the shift in power. David, caught between his bride's distress and his own newfound understanding, oscillated between awkward apologies and stony silence. The real fallout began the moment the wedding reception ended. My phone buzzed incessantly. Texts from my mother, frantic and confused, emails from my father, attempting to mediate, and then, the inevitable calls from Eleanor's mother, her voice shrill and accusatory, demanding to know why I was being so difficult and threatening to expose my unpleasant nature to the rest of the family. But the family, for once, was divided. David, having seen the proof, was surprisingly supportive, though his support came with a heavy dose of guilt. He admitted, in a hushed conversation later that week, that he'd always suspected Eleanor was a bit much, but he'd never had the courage to say anything. My parents, bless their hearts, were caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace, but I think, deep down, they knew I was in the right. My quiet stand had, in its own way, validated their own unspoken frustrations. Eleanor's social standing, built largely on the illusion of effortless success and curated charm, began to unravel. The whispered gossip about her brutal behavior regarding a sentimental family heirloom, the one with the legal backing, started to spread. Her attempts to portray me as a vindictive sister-in-law fell flat when the actual documentation surfaced, shared discreetly with a few trusted relatives. The porcelain figurines, a significant part of my grandmother's valuable collection, remained safely out of Eleanor's reach, destined for the hushed halls of a museum, a silent testament to a promise kept. She found herself ostracized, not in a dramatic, public spectacle, but in the quiet, insidious way that social circles operate. Invitations dwindled. The effortless access she'd enjoyed to certain exclusive gatherings became harder to secure. Her carefully constructed facade began to crack under the weight of her own avarice, exposed not by a grand declaration, but by the quiet, precise execution of a legal document and the unwavering resolve of a woman who had finally decided to reclaim her narrative. I never spoke to Eleanor again. I didn't need to. The silence was far more effective. The robin's egg blue chair sits in my study, not in my entryway, not in Eleanor's home, but in my quiet space, where I can sit in it, read, and simply, finally, be. It's a constant reminder that sometimes, the most potent revenge isn't loud or violent, but a meticulously planned, dispassionate assertion of boundaries, leaving the antagonist adrift in the wreckage of their own entitlement, with nothing but the chilling echo of their own undoing.